The engines hummed like sleeping beasts as the countdown echoed through the ship's cold halls, and everyone moved with purpose, their boots hitting the metal floors in rhythm as lights blinked above and below. But one bunk near the back of the crew quarters sat untouched and quiet like a forgotten grave. Ray stood in front of it, his hand shaking just a little as he reached toward the nameplate that wasn't there, because there should have been a name there, but the space was blank and his stomach twisted into knots that he couldn't explain. He checked the manifest again, scrolling fast, eyes moving faster, and yet her name was not there, not in the list of engineers, not in the tech crew, not even in the system logs. And that was wrong, so very wrong, because Alara had always been there, always at her station, always fixing what no one else could fix, always quiet, always watching, always kind. He turned to Jenkins, his bunkmate, who was tightening his boots, and he asked, "Where is Alara?" And Jenkins looked confused, then shrugged, and said, "Who?" And Ray stared at him hard until Jenkins blinked like he remembered something far away, and said, "Oh, right, her, she's not on this run. I think she got reassigned or something." But that made no sense because Alara never mentioned leaving, and she always left things in order, and Ray knew she would have said goodbye, or at least left a note, or a tool on his bed like she always did before. He walked fast through the corridors, his boots tapping louder than before, and every crew member he passed smiled, nodded, gave quick salutes. But no one looked like they missed anyone, no one looked like they remembered her. He reached the tech room and stood in the doorway. It smelled like oil and heat and ozone, but there was something else, something missing. The little cactus she kept on the corner shelf was gone, and the screen she always cleaned was dusty and dark. Ray turned slowly, scanning the space, and then he saw it, a small piece of fabric tucked behind a power box. It was blue, with silver thread, the same kind Alara used to tie her braid. His fingers curled around it, and it was real soft, still warm maybe, or maybe that was just him, but the ribbon in his hand made his chest feel heavy, and something sharp moved behind his ribs. He whispered her name, Alara, as if the ship might answer, and for a moment the lights flickered, then steadied, and Ray thought maybe he imagined it. He went to the command deck and asked for Captain Mora, and the officer at the desk frowned, said the captain was busy with pre-launch orders, but Ray insisted, said it was urgent, and when Mora finally came out of his office, he looked tired and annoyed. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Mora asked, and Ray held out the ribbon and said, "Where is Alara?" And Mora looked at the ribbon, then at Ray, then back again, and his eyes narrowed. "She's not on the manifest," the captain said quietly. "She's not part of this fleet run." "That's not an answer," Ray replied. "She should be here." Mora sighed deep and looked over his shoulder as if making sure no one else could hear, then leaned close and said she requested transfer 2 weeks ago, said she needed to stay back for a classified reason, and that's all I know. But Ray didn't believe that, not the way the captain looked, not the way his voice trembled near the end, and not the way the hall lights dimmed again for just 1 second before returning to normal. That night, as the crew slept in silence and the ship drifted in launch orbit, Ray sat on his bunk, holding the ribbon and staring at the empty spot across from him. The bed made the locker sealed, and a strange hum in the walls that almost sounded like her voice. He checked the ship's roster one last time and scrolled slowly and carefully from top to bottom, but her name was gone, not even erased, just missing, as if it had never been there, as if she never existed. And the more he stared, the more he felt something was deeply wrong, not just with the list, but with the silence in the air. Because no one else seemed to care, no one else remembered the girl who had once fixed the failing life support with a single wire and a broken smile, the girl who had stayed up all night during the meteor storm recalibrating shields with greasy hands and tired eyes, the girl who had made coffee for the captain on his worst day and made the ship feel like home. Ray whispered her name again, softer this time, and the lights blinked once in reply. He didn't sleep that night, and neither did the ship, because in the heart of the metal, in the bones of the engine, something stirred, something waiting, something watching. And the empty spot remained untouched, like a promise left behind. Ray opened his eyes before the ship's lights turned on, before the morning announcements, before the crew stirred, because something had woken him, something soft and strange, like a voice too quiet to hear, but too loud to ignore. And he sat up staring at the empty bunk across from his, still made, still perfect, still wrong. He rubbed his eyes and listened, but the room was silent. The vents hissed gently, the hum of the ship throbbed in the walls. And yet he felt it again, not sound, exactly, more like a thought that wasn't his, a memory that didn't belong to him, drifting just out of reach like smoke. Ray stood and walked the halls without reason or orders, passing crew members with tired eyes and empty greetings, and every step felt like walking through a dream that someone else had dreamed long ago. When he reached the tool bay, he found the door already open, the lights flickering, and one drawer pulled out as if someone had just searched through it and left in a hurry. Ray walked in slowly, calling out, "Hello, anyone there?" But no one answered, and yet the hairs on his arms rose like static. He saw it on the floor near the corner, a wrench with a red mark on its handle, the exact kind Lara used, the exact same scratch across the grip, and he picked it up, holding it like a clue, like proof that he wasn't losing his mind. Ray brought it to the bridge and showed the engineering chief, but the man just shook his head and said that drawer was locked all night, that tool should not be out, and no one had clearance to enter that bay before shift start. Ray didn't argue, he just walked away and tucked the wrench in his belt like it belonged to him now. The day moved slowly with drills and checks in preparation for the long jump through deep space, but Ray couldn't focus, not with that feeling pressing on his chest like a weight, and not with that name whispering through his mind like wind slipping under a sealed door. Lara. He returned to the tech room during his break and stood in the center listening and waiting, and then he saw it, words slowly blinking on the main screen, 5 letters written in soft green glow. "Hello." Ray stepped closer and whispered her name, and the letters faded, then returned. "Imstillhere." He reached for the keyboard, but before he could type, the screen went black, and the door behind him hissed open, and someone walked in. It was Lieutenant Kara from comms, and she looked at Ray like she had seen a ghost, and said, "Did you see it too?" And Ray nodded slowly and showed her the ribbon and the wrench, and her eyes widened. "I thought I dreamed her last night," Kara said. "I heard her voice near my bunk saying, 'Don't let them leave,' and I woke up crying." Ray asked her, "Do you remember anything else?" And she nodded again, said, "Lara," touched her shoulder, and said one word, "Stop." More crew began whispering over the next hours, strange things, missing socks, moved boots, laced wrong, strange soft noises in the walls, and once someone swore the engine core thrummed in a different tone, like it was humming a lullaby. The captain called for quiet, said these were nerves before launch, but Ray knew better, and so did Kara and a few others who had seen too much to dismiss it as fear. Ray started drawing a map of the ship, marking where each strange thing happened, each spot where someone heard something or found something out of place, and a pattern began to show, a circle around the lower engine chambers, where Lara used to work the most. Ray went down there alone, past doors that groaned too loud and lights that dimmed too low, and he carried the ribbon in his hand like a guide. He reached a panel near the power couplings, and there behind it, hidden between thick wires, he found a small note written in tiny script on a piece of tech wrap paper, old and worn and smeared with oil. It said, "They won't listen, but you might if you find this. Follow the heat, find my trail. I'm in the wires. Now, I am not gone. I am not erased. I am warning you." Ray felt a chill crawl through his back like cold fingers, and the wall near him pulsed once like a heartbeat. And he knew then Lara had done something impossible, something no one would believe, but he had to find the truth. He whispered her name one more time, and the lights flickered in perfect rhythm, like a yes. When he returned to his bunk that night, the screen by his bed glowed softly, showing 2 words. THANKYOU. And the empty spot across from him no longer felt empty, but like it was waiting for something to begin again, something no one could stop now, because the ship was listening, and Lara was whispering through its bones. Ray did not sleep that night, not really, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, not in a dream, but in the glow of a screen beside his bunk, in the shimmer of engine lights, in the stillness of the hallways, where her presence still walked. In the morning he stood outside the captain's office, heart heavy, hand tight around the ribbon and wrench he had carried since yesterday, and the officer at the door frowned when Ray refused to wait, refused to reschedule, and said, "This cannot wait, not now." Captain Mora looked up from his console when Ray stepped inside, and his face turned cold, quiet, unreadable, as if he had already guessed why Ray had come. Ray placed the ribbon on the desk, then the wrench, then the piece of tech wrap paper with Lara's note on it, and he said softly, "I found this near the core. She is trying to talk to us. She is inside the system somehow, and the crew is hearing her too." The captain leaned back in his chair, hands folded, eyes locked with Ray's, and he said nothing for a long moment, and the silence stretched like a wire ready to snap. Ray said, "Tell me the truth, Captain. You knew something, didn't you? You knew she didn't just disappear." Mora's jaw tightened, and he stood slowly, walked to the cabinet in the corner, unlocked it with a quiet click, and pulled out a small silver badge. It was old, scratched, but Ray knew it right away. It was Lara's ID tag, the one she always clipped to her tool belt. She gave this to me 2 weeks ago. The captain said she came in during night shift with eyes full of fear and said, if I am not on the list, do not launch. And I asked her why, but she wouldn't tell me, only that we would all die if we left without solving something first. Ray stared at him and asked, why did you believe her? And Mora's voice cracked when he said, because her hands were shaking, and Alara never shook, not even during the reactor scare, not even during that hull breach. When we lost 6 crew members, she was always steady, always calm. She said she found something buried in the ship's systems, something that did not belong, code that was rewriting itself, patterns that changed every time she tried to delete them. And the deeper she went, the more it pushed back. I offered to get her help. Mora said I offered to send her to Earth Command for a proper investigation, but she said there was no time, said she had to stay behind and stop it from inside. She requested transfer from the roster, made it official, told me not to speak her name, and that was it. I thought she was gone. I thought she'd vanish from records, and that was her plan, but now the ship is shaking and people are whispering, and I think she never left. Ray asked what kind of code, what did she find, but Mora only shook his head. Said, I never saw it. She said showing it would make it stronger. That night the ship slowed without command, and the engines dimmed like a breath being held, and the lights shifted to red for just 1 second, and then returned to normal. An alarm sounded in the comms bay, but there was no danger, no breach, no fire, only static. The crew gathered on the bridge, while Ray and the captain stood by the navigation screen, and suddenly the speakers crackled, and every sound in the room died, as one soft voice began to speak. It was her, it was Alara, not through a speaker, but through the ship itself, through the humming wires and the power lines, through the pulse of life that moved beneath their feet. Stop, the launcher voice said, they are already inside. And then silence. Some crew stared in shock, some looked to the captain, who said nothing, and Ray turned toward the engine room without waiting for orders, because now he knew where to go, and he had to follow her voice before the countdown reached the final number. He ran through the lower decks, where steam hissed from valves and lights flickered like nervous eyes, and the walls seemed to breathe with the ship's fear. At the back of the old systems vault he found something strange, a terminal that had not been used in years, lit up with scrolling code, and the letters kept repeating a single phrase over and over again. It sees me. Ray stepped forward and placed his hand on the screen, and the ship trembled slightly, like something deep within was waking up, and then her voice returned softer this time, like a whisper in the dark. They are in the code. They were our skin. They wait in the launch. And Ray whispered back, Alara, what do we do? And the screen went black again, but he felt a warmth behind him, not from the room, but from her. She had not left. She had become part of something bigger, part of the ship, part of the fight. And now the clock was ticking, and only she knew what was hiding beneath the surface of a launch. And Ray swore he would not let them fly blind, not again, not without her truth, not without her warning, because she was not gone, she was not lost. She was still here, and they had to listen before it was too late. The countdown had restarted, and the crew moved like machines, following orders, checking systems, tightening bolts. But something was wrong, something deeper than fear, something colder than space, and everyone felt it. Ray stood in the systems vault, his hand still on the black screen, where Alara's message had vanished, and the air around him felt heavy, like a breath waiting to be released. And then the lights dimmed again, and her voice returned. Not through the speakers, not through any system they knew, but through the metal, the hum, the pulse of the ship itself. And it said, I'm not dead, but you will be if you don't listen. He backed away slowly, his heart pounding, and turned to find Lieutenant Kara standing in the doorway, her eyes wide, her face pale. And she said, I heard her again. She's everywhere now, Ray. She's in the power lines, in the air vents, in the walls. She's warning us, but no one will believe it. Ray nodded and told her what the captain said about Alara fighting a code virus, about being erased from the manifest on purpose to stay behind and protect the ship from inside. Kara said the code has changed again, navigation just rerouted us without command, and the launch timer moved forward by 5 minutes, and the AI denied override. Ray grabbed the wrench from his belt and said, then we go to the AI core now. They moved fast through the halls, past crew who looked around with nervous eyes and whispered that something was watching them, that tools had moved again, that lights flickered near the food station, and one crewman said he saw Alara's face in the reflection of the control panel, just for a second, just long enough to forget how to breathe. Ray and Kara reached the core chamber, and the guards at the door were already shaken. One of them said the temperature dropped inside, and no one could explain why, and the doors kept opening and closing on their own. Inside the AI room, the walls were covered in cold light blue and green and silver, all pulsing in a rhythm that did not match the ship's usual heartbeat, and the AI voice greeted them with strange words. "Welcome, user Ray. Welcome, Shadow, user Shadow, user Shadow user." Kara stepped forward and asked what is a shadow user, and the AI said that user does not exist, and then repeated her name 3 times, Alara, Alara, Alara. The core screen flickered and the map of the ship appeared, but strange red spots blinked across it near the life support, near the fuel line, near the jump drive, and each one pulsed faster and faster like a timer. Ray pointed and said those are infection points. She said they were already inside, and Kara nodded and whispered the virus is alive. Suddenly the lights went dark, the doors slammed shut, and the AI voice shifted into static. And then Alara's voice broke through. "Get out now, override is coming, I can't hold it much longer." Ray shouted, "Alara, what do we do?" And the lights came back, and a single message flashed on the screen. "Shut it down from the engine core, I will guide you." They ran. Behind them the ship groaned like it was in pain, metal creaked, wires snapped, and the sound of alarms grew louder with every step, but not the usual alarms, not mechanical, these sounded like screams. They reached the lower deck, and the engine hall was glowing with red light, and the smell of heat and danger filled the air, and Alara's voice whispered in Ray's ear like she was right beside him. "Panel 4, open it now, behind the coolant lines." He tore open the panel and found a strange black device humming quietly, something that did not belong, something pulsing like a heartbeat, but not human, not Alara, not ship. Kara gasped and said that is not Federation tech, that is alien code that is growing. Ray said, "What do we do?" And Alara's voice answered through the room, like wind across steel. "You break it." He raised the wrench high and smashed the device once, twice, 3 times, and on the 4th hit it cracked open, and light burst out like smoke made of fire, and the red lights turned white, and the screaming stopped. The ship went silent. For a moment everything stood still, the hum, the light, the breath of the ship frozen in peace. And then Alara spoke again, soft and slow. "That was one, but not all. I am still holding the others, but I'm fading." Ray said, "No, we will help you. We will find them all and stop them." But Alara said, "Only you can now. I am inside too deep. I'm part of the ship, part of the defense. I can't leave." Kara said, "Can we see you? Can we talk to you again?" And Alara's voice trembled a little and said, "Maybe if the ship survives the next phase, if the core does not fall, if the launch is delayed long enough." Ray stood tall and said, "Then we stop the launch no matter what." They walked back through the halls as the crew stared in silence, and the captain met them at the bridge, and his eyes showed he knew something had changed, something had been seen that no one could unsee. Ray placed the broken device on the console and said, "This was never just a launch, this is a war, and she is still fighting it." And the captain nodded once and whispered her name like a prayer into the silence of the waiting stars. The override countdown had begun, and the voice of the ship said launch in 15 minutes, launch in 14, and Ray stood at the center of the engine control room, hands shaking, heart racing, as the lights above flickered like lightning behind a thin cloud. Captain Morris stood beside him, pale and silent eyes on the central panel, where numbers turned red and stayed red, and no one could stop them, no command worked, no code held, and the ship ignored every voice but hers. Alara's voice had gone quiet since the last message, and Ray felt the silence like ice crawling up his spine, and he whispered her name once, twice, 3 times, and still nothing came back. Kara called from the comms line and said the system is locked tighter. Now nothing responds. We can't reach outside the fleet. We can't even stop the oxygen reduction protocol. Ray knew the virus had taken more of the ship, and Alara was fighting inside it alone, but even she could not hold forever. And now the final firewall was just seconds from falling. He opened the manual core access panel, and inside saw the emergency shutdown lever marked in yellow, and black, never touched, never moved, only for last resort, and he hesitated. If he pulled at the engines would die, the launch would cancel, but the ship might never restart, and they could float in space until systems failed, and no one knew if Alara could survive that either. Captain Morris said, "Are you sure about this, Lieutenant?" And Ray said, "No, but she is, and I trust her," and Mora looked at him long and hard, then nodded once and stepped back. The ship lights dimmed again, and this time they did not come back, and then her voice came. Soft, slow, almost gone. Ray. He turned and said, I'm here, Alara, just tell me what to do. She said they're inside the launch sequence. Now, if they complete it, the virus will spread to the fleet, and from there to the colonies. And Earth, you must stop the chain, you must burn the seed. Ray said, I'll shut it down right now. And she said, wait, you must isolate the virus, or it escapes into the power loop. Look for the blue wire with the notch, it leads to the false memory gate. He searched fast, pulling wires, checking circuits. And then he saw it, the blue line, with a tiny burn mark near the end, and he pulled it free, and the ship screamed. Not like metal, not like code, like something alive, like a beast caught in fire. Ray reached for the shutdown lever and heard her voice again, shaking, now fading. Tell them I did not run, I stayed to fight. Tell them I remember the stars the way they looked before the war, and how you smiled when I fixed your boots that one time. Ray pulled the lever. The room went dark. The engines went silent. The countdown died. All across the ship systems froze, alarms vanished, and lights stopped blinking, and the hum that had always lived in the walls, since day one, since training, since launch was gone. And in that silence, Ray fell to his knees, because it felt like her heartbeat had stopped. Kara entered the room, breathing hard, eyes wide, and said, we did it, the launch, stopped the virus, is dead, or sleeping, or gone, I don't know, but it's over, and the ship is clean. But Ray didn't answer right away, because he was listening, waiting, hoping. Then one small light blinked on the panel, and her voice came one last time, soft like wind through trees. Thank you. And then silence again. Ray stood slowly and walked with Kara back to the bridge where the captain waited and the crew gathered, and for a moment no one spoke, no one moved, because they all knew something had been lost, something had been saved, and they were not the same people who woke up this morning. Captain Mora looked at Ray and said, I'll file the report, I'll write the truth, but I doubt they'll believe it. Ray said, I don't care if they believe it, as long as they remember her. Mora nodded and said, we all will. That night the ship remained in orbit around the moon, lights dimmed, engines quiet, and crew silent. Some said they heard soft music from the vents, a song no one could name, but all remembered. Others swore their screens blinked once, and showed her face for a second, like she was still watching, still guarding, still near. Ray returned to his bunk and placed the ribbon on the wall, where her name used to be, and whispered her name again like a promise. Alara. She had not left, she had not vanished, she had become something more. Not a ghost, not a voice, but a guardian inside the wires, behind the walls, beneath the stars. And Ray closed his eyes and let the silence speak, because even in that quiet he could still feel her near. She had saved them all, and he would never let the fleet forget it. The engine stayed cold for 3 more days, and no one dared restart them, no one touched the controls, without thinking of her, without thinking of a voice that had saved them, without asking what she had become. The crew moved carefully, now softly, respectfully. They walked the halls like walking through a temple, and every sound felt louder in the silence she left behind. Ray stood at the main observation window, alone, staring into the stars, and thinking about everything that had happened, and wondering if it had all really been real, or just a shared dream among tired people on a haunted ship. But the broken panel still hung open near the core, the black device still lay cracked in the engine chamber, and the ribbon still hung near his bunk, fluttering gently each time the air vent sighed. Kara joined him quietly, eyes red from lack of sleep, and said, the system checks are clear again, we're safe to relaunch, and Ray nodded, but said nothing. Captain Mora called a crew meeting in the main deck. Every member gathered in silence, and the captain stood before them, holding her badge in his hand, the silver one worn and scratched and real. He raised it slowly and said, we owe her everything, more than we will ever understand, more than anyone back home will ever believe. The launch was canceled, the fleet delayed, but our lives were not lost, because she stayed behind, because she chose not to be on the list, not to be remembered by orders or files or brass. But we remember. He placed the badge on the command table and stepped back, and no one clapped, no one cheered. They just stood there in quiet agreement that she was part of them still. Ray spoke next, voice calm and clear, and said her name was Alara. She was never loud, never proud, never looking for praise, but she saved us, and we will never erase her again. He pointed to the screen and said, open the manifest, and the tech officer blinked, then nodded, and brought it up. The list of names filled the display, one after another in rank and order, but Ray walked up to the console and typed her name at the bottom. Just 5 letters. ELARA. The screen accepted it without error, and the lights on the deck flickered once in soft approval. The ship hummed again that day, but it was a new sound, lighter, warmer, more human. That night the stars looked closer somehow, and the ship passed near the moon, and its reflection spread across the windows in silver and shadow. Ray looked out again and gasped as he saw something on the glass, not his face, not the ship, but her. A shape, a silhouette, standing beside him, eyes soft, arms folded the way she used to stand when listening to someone fix something wrong, and waiting to see if they would mess it up. He reached toward the glass, but she was already fading like mist, like memory, like starlight, and he whispered thank you, and her reflection smiled before it was gone. The next morning the engines powered on with a low steady hum, and the fleet commander gave the go for departure, but this time no one rushed, no one shouted. Ray stood by the control panel one last time and watched as the ship's logs rebooted and new data appeared, and in the system core logs a final note blinked into place with no source code and no author. It read, "I will watch the stars for you." The ship launched without error, clean, smooth, quiet, and as they drifted into the black sky no one looked back at Earth, but all eyes searched the stars for something more. In the mess hall someone had placed a small frame on the wall, with her picture, not official, not scanned, just one taken during a maintenance, shift, her hair tied back, her smile small but real. Under it someone had written a single line in thick marker, not part of protocol, not part of any regulation. She wasn't on the list, but none of us dared leave without her. As the days passed and the stars moved, Ray found peace in the small things, the way the lights stayed steady, the way the system checks rang clear, the way her name blinked once on the crew board every time he walked by. Not a ghost, not a glitch. A guardian. In the wires. In the ship. In the sky. She was still here. And the fleet would never forget her again.